Biker punches his friend, but Big Rock destroys him with his fist. A crisp autumn sun rose over the bustling streets of Chicago, its warmth hardly cutting through the chill in the air. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, former wrestler turned Hollywood superstar and entrepreneur, was back home for a short break between filming and business ventures. That morning, his longtime friend and legendary director, Martin Scorsese, had called him up to meet for coffee at a quiet diner near the waterfront. Despite their different worlds, the two shared a bond forged through years of mutual respect and an appreciation for standing tall in the face of adversity. Martin, well into his years, still carried himself with the sharp wit and seasoned presence of a man who had seen it all. He had that quiet intensity, the kind of man whose gaze alone could command a room. He was never one to back down from an argument, which sometimes rubbed people the wrong way, but he didn't care. That morning, he parked his vintage Mercedes near the diner and stepped out, adjusting the collar of his black wool coat. Dwayne wasn't far behind, pulling up in a sleek black Escalade. The air smelled of fresh coffee and buttered toast as Martin stepped onto the sidewalk. Just as he reached for the diner's door handle, a loud grating noise cut through the early morning quiet. A group of bikers roared up the street, their engines echoing off the surrounding buildings. Among them was a burly, heavily tattooed man who went by the name of Jax, a man with a reputation for stirring up trouble wherever he went. He was tall, but nowhere near Rock's towering stature, with a thick beard and an expression that carried a permanent scowl. As the bikers came to a stop near the diner, Jax slid off his custom Harley, his heavy boots thudding against the pavement. His sharp eyes locked onto Martin, narrowing with sudden disdain. "Hey, old man," Jax sneered, stepping forward. "Ain't you that director who thinks he's some kind of genius?" Martin barely raised an eyebrow. "Depends on who's asking," he said evenly, his voice as cool as ever. Jax's lips curled into a smirk. "You look out of place around here. This ain't some Hollywood set. Why don't you do yourself a favor and keep walking?" Martin chuckled, shaking his head. "I was drinking coffee in places like this before you were even born." Jax's smirk faltered, irritation flashing across his face. "I don't like your tone." Before Martin could respond, Jax's fist shot forward in a flash, landing a hard punch to Martin's jaw. The impact sent him stumbling back a step, but he quickly regained his footing, rubbing his jaw with a slight nod, acknowledging the hit. Gasps rippled through the few early morning bystanders. Inside the diner, a waitress dropped her coffee pot, the glass shattering against the floor. A moment of stunned silence stretched across the street before a deep, rumbling voice shattered it. "What the hell did you just do?" Jax turned just in time to see Dwayne Johnson stepping out of his SUV, the doors slamming shut behind him. At 6'5", The Rock was an absolute force, his massive frame casting a long shadow over the pavement. His normally relaxed face was hard, his dark eyes locked onto Jax with a dangerous intensity. Jax, for all his bravado, suddenly felt very small. "Who the hell are you?" he barked, trying to mask the nervous edge creeping into his voice. The Rock took slow, deliberate steps forward, his entire body radiating controlled fury. "I'm his friend," he said, voice dangerously calm. "And you just made the worst mistake of your life." Jax snorted, attempting to reclaim his confidence. "Yeah? You gonna do something about it, big guy?" The Rock didn't answer with words. In one fluid motion, he reached out, grabbed Jax's wrist mid-motion as he tried to swing again, and twisted it with ease. A sickening crack echoed through the street as the biker yelped in pain, his knees buckling. The air smelled like burnt rubber and asphalt, the world closing in on Jax as pain flooded his senses. The Rock didn't stop there. With a powerful shove, he sent Jax stumbling backward into his own bike, knocking it over with a loud metallic crash. The other bikers started to rise from their seats, their hands hovering over their belts, but one look from The Rock had them hesitating. There was something in his gaze, a quiet warning, an unspoken promise that if they moved, they would meet the same fate as Jax. Jax, now red-faced and seething, scrambled back to his feet. He lunged forward, throwing a wild punch. The Rock sidestepped with the agility of a man half his size, then struck. A single devastating punch to Jax's midsection folded the biker in half. The sheer force lifted him off his feet before he crumpled onto the pavement, gasping for air, his body convulsing as he wheezed, desperate for oxygen. But the Rock wasn't finished. Before Jax could react, he delivered a swift uppercut that snapped his head back, sending him sprawling onto his back. The sound of the impact was sickening. Bone meeting flesh, force meeting resistance, and resistance breaking under the sheer weight of power. The street was dead silent except for Jax's ragged breaths and the hum of nearby traffic. The bikers looked on, frozen in place. None of them dared to make a move. The towering man in front of them was not someone to trifle with. Martin, now dusting himself off, let out a low whistle. "Hell of a right hook you got there," he said, cracking his neck. The Rock exhaled, shaking out his fists, his adrenaline still high. "You okay?" Martin smirked, patting the Rock's arm. "I was about to teach him a lesson myself, but I suppose I'll let you take the credit." The Rock gave him a sideways glance, his stern expression easing slightly. "Next time, wait for backup." Sirens blared in the distance, their wailing cries slicing through the heavy tension still lingering in the air. Someone had called the cops. The bikers, sensing trouble, exchanged quick glances before bolting for their bikes. Engines roared to life like a pack of wild animals. Tires screeched, and within seconds they were gone, vanishing into the city like ghosts before the law arrived. Jax lay sprawled on the pavement, groaning. His breath was shallow, blood trickled from a split lip, and he clutched his ribs. His pride was shattered more than his body. He shifted slightly, wincing, but the weight of defeat kept him pinned down. He had lost. Completely. When the police finally pulled up, the wail of their sirens cut through the tense air like a blade. Red and blue lights flickered against the brick walls and broken pavement, illuminating the wreckage of the fight. Martin stood tall, his stance wary but controlled. The Rock, muscles taut, his knuckles still red, simmering with the remnants of battle, and Jax, beaten, winded, and too humiliated to even try running. The scent of sweat and blood lingered in the air, mingling with the acrid bite of exhaust fumes from a distant engine. One of the officers, a grizzled veteran with weary eyes that had seen too many nights like this, stepped forward. He took in the scene with one slow sweep of his gaze before sighing deeply. "Let me guess," he muttered, locking eyes with the Rock. "Self-defense?" The Rock nodded, his expression unreadable. "He hit my friend first." Several bystanders immediately chimed in, eager to confirm what had happened. Some held up their phones, scrolling through shaky footage of the altercation, murmuring to one another as they reviewed the evidence. The officer exhaled sharply, rubbing his forehead as he crouched down beside Jax, who was now groaning on the ground. "You're lucky it was just a couple of punches," the officer muttered, shaking his head. "Otherwise, we'd be scraping you off the street." Jax didn't argue. He had nothing left to say. The officers hauled him up, roughly slapping cuffs onto his wrists before dragging him toward the squad car. The metal door slammed shut behind him with a finality that sent a chill through the watching crowd. The Rock stood motionless, watching as the squad car's lights strobed against the pavement. A part of him knew this wasn't over. Men like Jax didn't take humiliation lightly. There would be consequences. There always were. Martin let out a breath of laughter, running a hand through his hair. "You read my mind." But the Rock wasn't laughing. He felt it before he saw it. The presence. A shadow moved in the alley across the street, slipping just out of reach of the flickering streetlights. A figure, barely visible, watching, waiting. And then, as if sensing the Rock's awareness, it disappeared into the darkness. A slow, uneasy chill crept up his spine. This wasn't just about Jax anymore. It was bigger, darker. A gust of wind kicked up loose debris along the street, whispering through the empty spaces where the bikers had once stood. The Rock clenched his fists, his bruised knuckles aching with the weight of the night's events. He had been in enough fights to know when one was finished. This was just the beginning. Martin noticed the shift in his expression. "Something wrong?" The Rock didn't answer right away. He exhaled, scanning the shadows one last time before turning back to Martin. "Yeah," he said quietly, his voice edged with something Martin had never heard before. Dread. "Someone's watching. And I don't think they're done with us yet." The night swallowed their words as they walked away, but the feeling lingered. The streets had eyes, and somewhere, in the darkness, they were still watching.